Hey, Joyful Journeyer, Anita Adams here, your host. And today I'm excited to introduce you to Dr. Ricci-Jane Adams, the founder of the Institute for Intuitive Intelligence. Ricci-Jane shows us how to un-F our intuition, activate our inner authority, and trust ourselves so we can create wildly successful lives. Ricci-Jane resides in Melbourne, Australia, and is the author of Spiritually Fierce, Superconscious Intuition, and Love Notes to the Divine. She has a doctorate from the University of Melbourne. She is a transpersonal psychotherapist and has devoted over 25 years to her spiritual awakening. Welcome, Ricci-Jane. I'm so delighted to have you here today.
Thank you, beautiful Anita, and no relation, although I love that we have the same surname.
It's the best. Awesome. I've got so many questions for you today, and I'm really excited about diving into this. And when I discovered your work, I'm like, wow, this is my kind of gal. She's got so many great things going on. And I love the language you use. I love your presence. I just love everything about the work that you're doing. So I'm really excited about diving in this. So my first question for you, a lot of people talk about intuition, but you make a distinction between intuition and what you call intuitive intelligence. So let's start there. Can you help us understand the difference?
Yeah, that's a great question. The idea of intuition is that it is, in my understanding, innate within all of us. It is part of our biology, and it's not special. It's not a few chosen special people who have it. All of us have it equally. But it's like a raw lump of clay. And some of us will decide we're interested in carving that lump of clay into something beautiful, and others don't even know they have the lump of clay. So it will either be hit and miss, or never connected to, or never shaped into something more refined and sophisticated. So that idea of intuition as innate biological gut instinct, if you like, it's that primary form of intuition that keeps us alive, because we know that our instincts kick in when we're in danger. We can be detecting things in our environment, even if we can't see them, that says, don't go down that street, or don't get into that car with that person. We just have that life protecting life impulse within us. For some people, that innate intuition is more refined from birth. And those are the ones that we might describe as having a special gift. But it's simply that they were born perhaps with a more pronounced connection. All of us have the same access to refining that intuition from that primary gut instinct level to the level of superpower, which is what we call intuitive intelligence. Now, intuitive intelligence has an evolutionary implication. There is a sense that I want to learn more about this innate biological capacity. I want to study it. I want to create the conditions in my life that will allow it to become equal to my analytical intelligence, my creative intelligence, my emotional intelligence. And I'm going to do the work. And those special conditions are not about being special, but rather making a choice that you're going to put the energy and attention into it. Just as we can all speak French, but not all of us are going to take the time to learn to speak French. Intuition is no different. But when we do those things, and we can talk about what those conditions are, if you like, that turn it from innate intuition to intuitive intelligence, we are able to have unending flow state, embodied connection to a non-sensory source of information, what quantum physicists call the field, right? So there is a unified field that inherently interconnects us, where all time and space is one, and all lived experience of the human collective is accessible. And so when we put the work in to go from that lump of clay to that magnificent David-like carving, we are accessing that incredible field, and we have direct connection to all time, all space. But it does require us making a choice, right? Just as you can't sit on the couch watching TV hoping that you're going to suddenly be able to speak French. You're going to do the work to turn that part of the brain on and to attain that skill. So I can talk about the conditions, but I'll leave it there for the moment and see where you'd like to go.
Actually, I would love to dive into that. It feels like a natural flow to move into the conditions. And thank you so much for such a great analogy and also just making that distinction, because I used to be somebody that thought that you had to be somebody special to have that ability. So I love that we are breaking down that myth, because we all have access to this intuitive intelligence. And we just need to work on honing that. So let's dive into what are those conditions that enabled it for us?
So the first thing is to understand that our biology is the technology of our intuition, and specifically our nervous system. So if we live in lives that are dysregulating, chaotic, constantly putting everybody else before ourselves, stressing ourselves out, living in anxiety, we are not a match for a connection to that unified field, right? That quantum field, because we are fritzed. Our system is in survival mode. And so we are learning, first and foremost, to cultivate the conditions of accessing the parasympathetic nervous system. So that means that we would need to take time each day in stillness, silence, and solitude. They're my 3 S's. I've also added recently a 4th S, which is slowness. So slowing everything down. So having time where you're connecting to the breath, where you're connecting perhaps through chanting or meditation or visualization to come into regulation and to basically make that a way of life, not something you do, once a week or once a month, but a daily practice. And it doesn't have to be that you're carving out 2 hours in the morning at 4 a.m. It's that you're paying attention to your nervous system health and primarily what we call that fitness. So our capacity to move from dysregulation, which is normal, and we should regulate and dysregulate, because if we're in danger, we need the shot of adrenaline and cortisol to get us up and out of the way. But it's how long it takes us to recover. So if we're extremely dysregulated and living in survival mode, we'll get an email from our boss criticizing something that we did, and we might spend 2 weeks in a downward spiral. If we are learning to pay attention to our nervous system health, we shorten that recovery time and come back into the parasympathetic nervous system much more efficiently. And that is the state we need to be in to be receptive to non-local intuition. So that is another difference between intuition and intuitive intelligence. Intuition, as I said, is biological. So we're picking up through electromagnetic signals. We're all electromagnetic beings. There's nothing spiritual about that. You can go to the hardware store and buy a device that will measure the electromagnetic field of everything that exists. So we are constantly, through our biology, picking up information from one another, from objects, from places, through electromagnetic transmission. When we're working with this intuitive intelligence, this refined form, we are going beyond the biology of the electromagnetic field, and we're going into accessing that quantum field, that unified field of which we are all inherently connected. And that is where we access non-local information. So, for example, if I'm sitting with you and you're a tarot reader and you draw cards, or you're a psychic, or you're a healer, you are working with local intuition. You're picking up information through the electromagnetic field that I am producing because I'm alive. That's as sophisticated as it gets. However, we all know that we have perhaps moments, or for those who practice, more frequent connection to information that is not accessible through any sensory physical experience. You know something's wrong with someone on the other side of the country and you need to give them a call, or you need to, check on your child wherever they happen to be. You have a sense of knowing something without cause and effect. So the quantum works outside of the Newtonian paradigm. It works beyond cause and effect. And so a causal information, I know without knowing how I know. I didn't go and study it. I didn't research it. I'm not picking it up through your biology. We're not even needing to be in the same room. So that is another aspect of intuitive intelligence, is that we're accessing non-locality or non-local intuition. So I know this is a lot of information, so feel free to pause me at any time if you want to jump in. Another aspect of intuitive intelligence is that we have to change our perception of ourselves. Now, when we're working with just that lump of clay of innate intuition, we can have low self-worth, we can have lots of trauma, we can have lots of unmet subconscious fear. But in order to get into that ideal state within our physiology, we need to meet that trauma. We need to meet these subconscious fear programs and effectively change our perception of ourselves from separate, alone, isolated, dumped on this unfriendly planet by an unfriendly God, to I am one with all. I am that I am. And that is an evolutionary shift, right? Where I am no longer seeing myself as fragile and helpless, but rather that I am the co-creator of my reality. So we have to change our minds about ourselves. And I call this spiritual self-esteem. You can't hate on yourself. You can't beat yourself up. You can't be mean to yourself and expect to be able to align to that non-local field, because that non-local field is what I would refer to as the God, right? If I am one with the mind of God, I have to shift my idea of who and what I am. And that will happen the more we use our intuitive intelligence. It's not like you just wake up and go, oh, well, I'm going to love myself now. We have programming, we have familial bonds, we have trauma, we have ancestral wounding, we have so many collective unconscious programs harbored inside of us that need to be lovingly met. And so the next, I guess, distinction of intuitive intelligence is from intuition is that it is developed by meeting and releasing subconscious fear programs in safety, in a trauma-informed way. And so we in the Institute have developed a process of how to meet and release subconscious fear, because that is the only impediment to our intuitive intelligence. We have to be willing to look at the places where we feel lesser than oneness and lovingly tend to those, not shame them, not bully them, not spiritually bypass them and everything's great, right? No, everybody has fear. Everybody has fear. And that is because that's how we evolve as a human collective, right? We evolve through those fear programs. So fear is going to keep coming. Life is hard. Challenges will happen, loss and grief and pain and trauma. But it's not that we're trying to prevent those. It's how do we lovingly work with those as evolutionary tools, not as reasons to not evolve. So they're the kind of critical differences. And it's very different to what most intuition training out in the world will suggest, right? The crystals or phases of the moon or planets or special green juices or whatever it is that we need to access, where it's entirely an inside job. It's entirely about shifting our perception of ourselves away from a fear dominant model to a love dominant model.
Right. Love is the answer, no matter the question, right? It always comes back to, I love that. Yeah, what's really standing out is that whole journey you're talking about really is part of the spiritual awakening, though, isn't it? You know, it's really coming home to self, coming home to loving who you are in all of your imperfections and being one with that I am, and God is part of who I am, the divine within. I know my personal journey has had a lot of that, how do I put it? Coming home to self, to really, truly loving who I am. And that, for me, happened while walking in nature.
Yeah.
So,
We're given so many clues by a benevolent universe of what we truly are, right? We just have to get out of the man-made world to have that reminder. Like, the universe is abundant. The universe is beautiful. Sometimes, as you say, just walking, I'm like looking at a tree leaf and I'm like, oh my God, like that leaf is perfection. Like we don't have to try very hard to find the beauty that is a mirror of our own infinite beauty.
Yeah.
And there's a term from, I think, Mary Magdalene's gospel, which is anthropos, but this idea of being fully human, fully divine. It isn't about overcoming our humanity or shaming ourselves into some spiritual perfection, but it's full acceptance of both, right? The soul came into this life to experience itself and to remember itself as divine, even though everything in the world we live in now will encourage us to not know that. So I love that reflection because I agree. I think this is part of the nervous system conditions we need to provide, is that if you never see sunlight, if you're never outside breathing fresh air, if your feet aren't on the earth, if you're not looking at nature in whatever form, you will feel disconnected. You will say, I'm not intuitive, but your life might be 24/7 chaos. And that would explain it, not the fact that you missed out. You're the one person out of 8 billion that got forgotten in this way. It's simply not true.
I love your four S's as well. To me, that's the way in. So stillness, silence, solitude, and slowness. That if we all embraced those four S's, I believe we would deepen our connection to ourself, deepen our connection to God within, and create the conditions, really create the conditions, as to use your language, that will allow us to develop our intuitive intelligence. So,
Yeah. I
thank
mean, there's
you.
plenty of people out there who use intuition but are not on a spiritual evolutionary journey. And I think that's another distinction of intuitive intelligence. Intuitive intelligence in the development of it within ourselves is a way to measure the evolution of our consciousness, right? Because intuitive intelligence is the language of consciousness. We know everything is energy. We exist in everything is vibrating particles. Nothing is solid. That is just truth. That's quantum physics. And so what shifts or alters the vibrational frequency is the feeling state that we're holding. And the feeling state is created by the beliefs that we harbor, right? Not in the conscious mind, but in the subconscious. So when we understand that shifting from a fear-dominant subconscious belief program or paradigm into a love-dominant program, which doesn't mean we're not going to feel fear, but again, we'll recover more rapidly, then we are at the vibrational frequency that makes us a match to live in that flow state. Because intuition is not something in this refined form that we turn on or off. We want to be connected to the God mind 24/7. Why would I want to disconnect from that? Right. And yet so often intuition training is taught through this idea is you've got a question, you stop, you get your cards, you ask the question, you receive that in whatever way, and you then disconnect and go back into your day. And I'm like, interesting. So if I could be connected 24/7 to the infinite field of inherent interconnectedness, why would I disconnect? And the reason why we think we have to disconnect is another faulty paradigm, is that we believe that we are developing intuition to give answers to other people.
Mm.
That to me is black magic. It is the worst abuse of our intuition. Because again, it's privileging this idea that some people have it and other people don't. I'm like, what a poor system that someone else would have the information I need. But why we like that idea is because if I say to you, you're going to have to sweat for this, you're going to have to say no to the abusive relationship or the self-abuse or the 24/7 stress and anxiety, you're going to have to figure out how to slow down everything. You're going to have to make changes. You'll be like, nah, I'll just pay my $50 to the psychic and they can tell me, right? Because we like the magic bullet. We know this from Western medicine. People don't want to change their lives. They want the tablet, the pill that they can swallow that allows them to go on doing the things that are harming themselves and reduce the consequences. And so most people like the idea that someone else knows more than they do, because it means that they don't have to come into that personal responsibility. They don't have to change their minds about themselves, because that can be more scary than anything else, right? To remember that you are the divine made manifest. And if you are hiding in your stories, or you don't know even how to meet those stories without traumatizing yourself more, it'll feel like an impossible mountain to climb, right? So I feel like our job is to really look at this as a way of measuring evolution of our own consciousness. And I'm always confused that people use intuition but aren't on an evolutionary journey.
Hmm.
It's possible, but it's not what intuitive intelligence is. It is a way for us to measure. We've moved from that biological level. It's 4 phases that I name of that map of consciousness of our intuitive intelligence, which we can get into if you like. But the idea is that there are indicators, right? We can see where we are in terms of our inner authority, our sovereignty, our sense of direct and personal connection.
Yeah. That inner authority, that's a great term. I like the inner authority. I think what it comes down to for a lot of people is a lack of trust for themselves. And we live in a society that has taught us to look outward for answers. They're coming to us all the time, whether we want them or not. People are telling us what we should do, how we should think, how we should act, how we should dress, how we should look. It's like nonstop through the media, through parents, friends, partners. So it's almost it is a retraining of how to, like again, coming back to stillness, silence, solitude, and slowness, that enables you to go inward, to be able to listen inward and to develop the trust. So when something emerges, be it a feeling, a nudge, a quiet whisper, that you can lean in and listen to that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And again, most of us run from personal responsibility and inner authority because if the buck stops with me, then who can I blame, right? Like there's very much that idea that it's out of our control. We're the victim of what's happening to us. And that is so often a dominant program for so many that it's a terrifying idea to say, actually, you have that inner authority. And I don't want to confuse this with, a superficial idea that if I want it, I can manifest it, right? We live in a world full of shadows. We live in a world full of programs like racism, like patriarchy, like misogyny that actually don't mean that we can just have what we want, right? Until we collectively dismantle the systems of oppression. But what we do have the authority over is our response to what happens to us. And people often go to an intuitive because they want to guarantee that something's going to work out in a certain way, usually according to their ego's demands, not their soul's demands, right?
Right.
So if you think about the last time you went to, a healer, a palm reader, or a psychic, it's usually when we're in massive fear, we don't know what's going to happen, and we want some guarantee that everything's going to be okay. And if you suddenly are the one who is providing that assurance, that's scary. But the other part of it is that we don't want to believe that we have a choice, that we can change the dynamic, we can change the way things unfold. And intuition is not within us to prevent things happening to us, but rather to have the most evolutionary response to whatever happens, right? Can I use this for my growth? Can I use this to evolve, to change? Or am I going to use it as evidence that I'm going to stay in this stuck, miserable victim mindset because there's just more proof, right? That everything's broken. There's no point trying. So again, there's a lot in that, but I think that if we can shift from this idea that intuition should prevent bad things happening to actually intuition equips us to know how to respond in the most refined, elevated, and evolutionary way, we've already won, right? We're already shifting this very big, just inefficient and unhelpful idea that our intuition should prevent things from happening. Because going back to the first point I made is like, fear is how we grow. It is just the way it is in this dream of Earth School. And fear event, whether it's the mean email from your boss or the loss of a child or some other, seismic shift, is not the problem. It's our belief about the problem. They say trauma is not the event, it's the response we have to the event. So two people could be in exactly the same circumstance, but one of them has subconscious programs that says you are not safe, this happened because you're bad, you aren't good enough to have a happy, easy life. And that will create trauma. Someone else will be like, it's all serving my highest purpose. And the trauma of that event will not get stuck in them.
Right. Okay. So you've used the word subconscious multiple times in our conversation here. And I get a little hung up on that because I feel it's out of my control. It makes me feel a little deflated, to be honest. Because it's like, oh, because I'm not even aware of it. So how can I move past that if these fears and all these things that are in me are subconscious and they are the block?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And yes, it's again that most of us are not taught how to access the subconscious, nor do we recognize that the subconscious is the phase of our consciousness that is doing the co-creation, the calling in, sending out a vibrational frequency that is inviting back a match for that vibrational frequency. And again, 4S's. If you invite stillness, silence, slowness, and solitude every day, you start to shift out of high beta brainwave state, which is where we live most of the time, get things done. You know, sometimes we need to be in that beta because that is how we achieve. But we can learn how to move into theta. Now, theta is the phase of the brainwave state that is slower and longer. And that is the opening to the subconscious, right? So we don't need to know what's in there. If we're paying attention to the patterns, we will probably notice that there is something motivating why we keep going back to the man who doesn't treat us well, or why we can never stick to the, health kick that we've designed for ourselves, or why we keep, losing our minds at our children when we want to be really conscious, loving parents. We can start to get the information. Okay, there's something going on here that is sabotaging my intentions. And that is what is housed in the subconscious. So part of this is, again, making a choice. Will I curate a life that allows me to slow everything down enough to notice these patterns and then sit inside of that theta brainwave state where the subconscious reveals itself? I have created a really efficient 7-minute meditation that I can share with your listeners called the micro method that does exactly that. It takes you through a very precise, very short journey from known conscious fear thought, like my partner left their socks on the bedroom floor again, even though the dirty laundry basket is 1 foot away, right? And there's a rage in me that is disproportionate to that. But when I sit with curiosity, and instead of just like going and picking a fight with him or yelling at my kids or, causing some car accident because I'm so angry and I can't process this feeling of rage that feels so wrong to be so angry, but it's still my truth. And we actually instead get curious, and we have the safety within us in our nervous system to say, okay, what's deeper than that? Slow down my breathing. Slow down my heart rate, not go into reaction, but actually just sit with curiosity. Oh, okay, fear of abandonment. I'm afraid that if I ask my partner to do better, they'll just say, no, you're not worth it, and leave, right? So I'm not actually angry about the socks. I'm angry that I don't know how to speak up, articulate my needs, and not risk being abandoned. So we learn more about ourselves, and then we take note. Okay, fear of abandonment. We might work on that particular fear for a long time. It's not like we want to solve it straight away. But what we do in the micro method is then we change the pathways in the brain that we're firing and wiring with deep compassion for that fear. So again, not bypassing, not just being like, everything's great, he's wonderful, I'm just going to make a list of the things I'm grateful for. No, the reality is that person is not playing their part or respecting you in that relationship. That's valid. But the worst case scenario that your subconscious is throwing up, you will be abandoned, you'll die alone, you'll never find love that's worthy of you. That is what we can circumvent, put in that circuit breaker. And that is what we do by changing our vibrational frequency with intent. And every time we do this, it's like it becomes easier. So the process doesn't take long. It's very similar to Byron Katie's work, if you're familiar with that, where she takes you through that process where you ultimately ask the question, is that true? And when you ask that question, if you are familiar with her work, like the belief might be my partner disrespects me by leaving the socks on the floor. Is that true? We can then get curious rather than immediately reacting to that thought. So we're creating a spaciousness. We are then opening the door to the subconscious. And the subconscious, as well as all of your biology, is primed to detox shock, trauma, fear, pain. It knows what to do, but we never give it the conditions. So we don't actually then have to figure out, how do I get rid of that fear of abandonment, which I've had since I was 2 when my dad left and blah, blah, blah. It's like, I don't know how to move that. We don't have to. But we do have to create the conditions that allow the subconscious to do the detoxification that it knows how to do. And that's what most of us are never taught. So we are afraid of this idea that I've got this basement of crap that I don't have any access to or ability to change. You absolutely do. But again, are you willing? Are you willing to do the work to create the conditions? Or are you just going to go pay the psychic to say, hey, am I meant to leave this man because he keeps disrespecting me, right?
Brilliant. There's so much gold in everything you just shared there. Thank you, Ricci-Jane. Again, coming back to the 4 S's, that seems to be the big takeaway from our talk so far. It leads to so much. I love that you have a micro method and that you're offering to share that with our listeners. That's fabulous. I will take you up on that. And my big takeaway from this is to sit with the curiosity, to be in curiosity about this. What I like about that, Ricci-Jane, is that you're not trying to change anything. You're not trying to push anything away. You're not denying anything. You're sitting in curiosity with what is going on. And I think in doing that, that's the doorway to the subconscious, is what I'm hearing. And I love it. I think that's because that's accessible to absolutely everybody. You don't have to go to, years and years and years of therapy to, break that down. It's really giving yourself permission to sit in stillness, slowness, solitude, silence, so you can open that door to your subconscious and hear the wisdom that is there. So thank you for explaining that, illustrating that so beautifully. In a lot of your teachings, you've mentioned that the most of the conversations people are having about intuition are, in a sense, off track. And I feel like we've touched on this, throughout our conversation so far. But what are people really getting wrong, and what needs to shift for a truer understanding?
Yeah, I mean, everything that we've discussed so far. And I think if we were to summarize, it is that idea that intuition is an inside job. It is our right, our birthright, and well within our capacity to be the direct oracle of our own lived experience, right? And that we are doing that not to prevent things from happening or trying to get our ego's needs met, right? But rather to find truth. And our truth might terrify us. We may not necessarily want that because it goes against the ego's machinations and yearnings and the programs that we've received from a capitalist, patriarchal, world that say this is what success is, this is what you should desire. And to find your own soul desires is often really confronting because you have to put down a whole bunch of programming. So if we work beyond the idea that intuition is going to be this quick fix or this magic bullet that's going to prevent bad things happening, but rather a way of how to navigate whatever is right in front of us with grace, then we've already won. This idea as well that the micro method leads us to is that fear is not the enemy. When fear rises, we will normally try to suppress it with our addictions, what we eat, what we drink, picking a fight with our partner, emotional chaos, buying things we can't afford, getting into debt. Basically, we will try to suppress that at all costs. But if we understand that fear is a messenger of intuition, so fear is basically saying, hey, you've forgotten your truth. You are a divine piece of a benevolent universe that is always working out on your behalf, aka your soul's behalf, not your ego's behalf. And fear is tapping you on the shoulder saying, hey, Anita, that really mean thought you just had about yourself. That's incongruent with your truth. Should we sort that out? And so instead of running from the fear that I'm too old, I'm too this, I'm too that, I can't, I'll never have the success I want, or whatever the nasty thought was, you sit with that loving curiosity and compassion for that fear and say, hey, thank you. Thank you for having the courage to show up and for letting me know where I forgot my truth. And now I will tend to that. Now I will do the work. And that's where the inspiration, the intuition might land to be like, okay, we're going to read this book that's been sitting on the bedside table for a year, but it's the right time now. It's got something in there for me. Or you will, open up your laptop and see, an ad for a retreat. And you're like, oh my God, that's exactly what I need to shift this energy. Or you might be led to a teacher, or you may just find a wisdom within inside of you, right? But you're not running from fear as a problem. You're running towards fear as a messenger of your intuition. And so it's very much a paradigm shift. And one of the biggest things that I support those that I serve to dismantle is that idea that fear is somehow a failure of your character. If you're truly spiritual, you'll be high vibing, love and light all of the time. I'm like, oh my God, we're shadow workers. Like we live in the underworld. That is our service. That is our medicine to the world and to ourselves. Like we're down in the dirt. If our only job is to meet and release subconscious fear to come back to our innate divine truth, then we're going to spend a lot of time in there and not as a burden. And we'll get to the point where fear rises and we're like, yeah, I'm get to know myself better today. Yes. Awesome. Cool. Oh, it's that same fear again. Right. Okay. Humbly go back to it. Humbly go back to it. Right.
Yeah.
That is, I would say, what most of us get wrong, because no one has taught us that. We think we have a deficit in our intuitive connection. And so we go to teachers or programs or whatever it is, looking to fix the deficit. You have no deficit. You just have a lot of stuff in the basement that is blocking access to truth. And our job is to clear that basement out.
I love the loving approach to self with that. Again, it's not about fixing anything. It's about acknowledging, it's about seeing, it's about being present with what is, because there's the teacher is showing up. I love how you said fear is a messenger of intuition. There's so much to be learned about ourselves when fear shows up. Yeah.
Yeah.
And we just have to have the courage to come forward with that fear, right?
Yeah, and we have to know how, because as you say, if you've never been taught how to safely work with fear, I might as well say, go pick up a 747 jet, right? Go pick up a Mack truck. Then you'll have all the intuition. There's no way that you can do that without having whatever support you need, right? So sending people to tend to their fear without teaching them, showing them how to do that safely could definitely result in a lot more trauma being caused. So it's really about helping people understand the relationship between the physiology and the evolution of our intuition. Again, anthropos, fully human, fully divine. You cannot bypass the body and get to the highest states. Your body is literally the technology. So if you're in an abusive relationship, that's a great place to start, right? What am I doing to my body? What am I putting into my body? What am I believing about my body? What am I doing in terms of my sleep and the way that I spend my time and how I move my body? Because if there's any sense of neglect or abuse in the way we treat our body, that is how we're treating our relationship to our intuition. And again, we'd much prefer to believe that there's a pineal gland decalcification that we could just go and get done to us, or that someone can unblock my throat chakra and suddenly it'll be fixed.
Right.
Healers are wonderful, and I'm not diminishing that at all, but it's temporary unless it's an internal shift. So you can go to a healer and you might even get a benefit temporarily. But if the paradigm or belief that led to the manifestation of whatever that illness or blockage is not tended to, you're just going to manifest it again.
Right.
You're not, right?
You just keep living in the loop. Yeah.
Yeah. So those are some of the critical differences that I am so passionate about, because I think we're doing a massive disservice to what is our highest form of intelligence. And this is proven by science, right? That we can get into all of that or not. Heart Math Institute is the place to go if you want to look at the science. But what we come to understand is our intuitive intelligence is the first intelligence to come online with anything, decisions, plans, whatever we're doing. Then we come into our analytical intelligence. Then we come into our emotional intelligence, right? So it's primary. And if we're not in an understanding of that, we are trying to work blindfolded, right? We're denying what is actually the biggest tool that we have.
Dismissing it and not giving it the room it needs to really come forward. So that leads to my next question, actually. It's really about trust, isn't it? So how do we build our trust so we can really rely consistently on our intuition?
We can always rely on our intuition, but the trust, as you say, is the kicker, right? I meet so many women whose problem is not lack of connection to their intuitive knowing. It's the courage to trust themselves to act on that.
Yeah.
Right. So they absolutely know what to do. And my next book is actually called You Know What to Do. But it could also be called You Don't Know What to Do until you're willing to put the conditions into your life so that you can trust that you know what to do, right? We think we don't know what to do. And when we're saying, I don't know, what we're usually saying is, I don't like what I know I need to do. I don't want to know that, right? It's not what I want. And so it is all the same conditions. Spiritual self-esteem, that remembrance that I am a divine piece of a benevolent universe, is about shifting our perception of ourselves, right? Moving beyond the ego stories of not enough and all the other ways that we mess ourselves up. And knowing that trust is trusting that the divine has got me, but not as separate to me, that I am that divine, right? That has got me. And again, people don't like that. They like the idea of God as dad on a throne, handing out cookies or punishment, like, some karmic something or other. And it's not true. We are that. We are that divine that we're reaching out to. And that's the beautiful paradox, is further in is further out. And so it is really about beginning with the small steps. So if you are driving and normally you take, a right to get to work, but that day you're like, go left, and you're like, but that's not the most efficient way to get to work, but I'm going to do it anyway. That builds the muscle. You may never know why you went left instead of right, what accident might have been prevented. Like, this is the thing. We don't always get proof of why we should be trusting our intuition. If you want proof of why you should be trusting it, ignore your intuition and follow the opposite. And you'll usually go, damn it, I wish I should have listened, right? How many times do we do that? Yeah. That's one way to get the proof. But wouldn't it be better to just say yes to that intuitive knowing without needing to know why?
Even if it doesn't make any sense whatsoever, just, yeah.
If you keep calling on your intuition and then doing nothing with the insight, that is an abusive relationship.
Huh.
Your intuition's going to go haywire and you're going to be like, oh, my intuition's broken. It's like, no, you just kept ignoring it. And that is an abuse. Why call it in if you're going to keep ignoring it? Because maybe you don't feel good enough to do what your intuition's guiding you to do. Maybe you don't feel worthy. Maybe you feel too old. Maybe you feel too fat, whatever your stories are. So you are continually calling something in and then denying it. That's not healthy. So your intuition will feel like it's fritzing because you're actually fritzing your own system. So trusting it, even when you don't know what that means, what's going to happen next, is how you build that muscle. And then the next step comes. The idea is that it's co-creative. You must take the first step on the path before the next step will be revealed. But if you sit at home on the couch waiting for the full plan to download, you won't get it. You won't get any plan, right? You've got to take that bold leap in faith to evidence that you're willing, you're playing your part for the next piece to land, right?
And often it's a really small little step though, too, isn't it? It could be, the next step could be just picking up the phone and calling somebody who's done what you want to do to get their insights on their experience. It doesn't have to be anything bigger than that very first step, right?
Yeah. And again, that's a misnomer of what we use intuition for. Like we save it like for the big, big, scary decisions as though it's going to run out, right? Like when you live in that embodied state of being, that flow state of intuitive intelligence, there is no conscious question to be asked because you know you're in flow with that highest form of intelligence guiding you from what you dress in the morning to what you eat for breakfast. And it flows so effortlessly that there's no sweat. You're not looking to ask a question. You're not having to freaking muscle test whether that muesli is the right choice. You are just in knowing. You have that certainty. And you know when you've stepped out of it because fear rises. And the fear rises as a course correction. You suddenly feel stress. You're like, oh, cool. I'm out of my flow state. Hey, stress, what do you want to teach me, right? What is your message? Cool. We tend to that. We go back into flow. There's nothing to ask. You are just living in that vibrational frequency of oneness, and life is moving towards you and away from you with no effort as your soul requires for its evolution, right? So this idea that we stop and we ask and we check. Now, again, look, I love kinesiology. I love everybody who does amazing things, but like all the other trinkets, muscle testing or anything like that is another separation mentality where I need something external or not innate and flowing to give me an answer to a question. It's like, I don't have any questions. If I have questions, I'm usually in fear because I'm trying to control an outcome. So if I can really truly embody that flow state of intuitive intelligence, I know when I've stepped out of right action by the fear rising. That is the indicator. And I know how to work with that fear to come back into flow. That's it.
So your emotions are your navigators, helping you along the way. I ask a lot of questions, and I don't see that as being misguided. Like and maybe because I'm earlier on my spiritual journey than you, I'm not sure. But I love going inward and asking myself, what is mine to do today, for instance, or what is it that I really want? Like I come back to that question all the time. What is it that I really want? And I listen to what is emerging, what feels right for me. And I feel like that has been my guide going in and asking these questions. I often ask, who am I? And actually I don't ask that one so much anymore, but at the very beginning of my spiritual practice, that was a question I asked a lot. Who am I? And that's where I found who I am is the divine, but it took a long time to get to answer that question. So, but maybe that's not what you're saying in asking questions.
I, first of all, don't want you to diminish where you're at or how you work with it, because I'm simply sharing my understanding and experience, and everybody makes their own relationship. So if questions work for you, then ask the questions, right? Because what that is probably more likely doing is reminding you of your true nature, that you're connected to that infinite field, rather than it being, oh, I was disconnected before and now I'm reconnecting. You are probably not thinking in that way. But if that is a beautiful moment for you to go, oh yeah, I'm one with the mind of God, cool. That is what that question's doing. The question's not amplifying your access, but it's bringing your conscious attention
Yes,
to.
exactly.
Because life is busy and things happen and we get very caught up in the muggle reality because it's very demanding. So those moments of pausing, breathing, slowing down your heart rate, that's all you're doing in those moments. The question is kind of a lovely cherry on the top. Do you need to ask a question? No, but if it brings you into that state, then do it, right?
Gotcha.
If dressing in all crushed velvet and putting feathers on your head makes you feel more connected, do it. Like, it's just remembering that ultimately there is no need for it and that it is a temporary scaffold, but it's working.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the same as it is for guides, right? I get this question a lot around, yeah, but I communicate with angels or devas or fairies or my dead nana or whatever, or my animal spirit. That is cool. Go ahead. But ultimately you will come to the truth that that is an aspect of you because you are everything. There's no separation. The first immutable law, all is one. There is nothing separate from us. So we can use guides as a temporary scaffold or prop to help us connect to that part of ourself, but it is part of ourself. It's not external. There is no dimension where all the guides are sitting around waiting for our cosmic phone call. We are simply tapping into, to go back to the language of vibration, a higher frequency. So when you ask a question of your own self,
Yes.
you are just remembering to shift your frequency to a higher vibration, and it feels good. And it feels like the information flows. You're always in that flow.
Right.
And it's not a problem as long as we understand that ultimately we don't need to stop and ask a question. But while we're in the paradigm of being human in a very dysregulating world, anything we do to slow us down is a benefit.
Beautiful. Yeah, thank you for that. That makes a lot of sense to me. I used to be somebody who looked outward for everything, for all my answers. I didn't trust myself enough. So now I'm trusting myself, and I find going for my slow walks, disconnecting from, media, disconnecting from phones, getting outside and having conversations with God, my higher self, is the way that gets me into the flow. And what I'm hearing from you is that we're always in that place. Once we recognize that we are one with everything, we're in that field. We just need to recognize that and then allow. And simply, that's really what it is. It's an allowing, isn't it? It's not a searching. It's just an allowing, and allowing our emotions to help navigate the way. So
Exactly. I love that. It's like saying to someone with a broken leg, you can run a marathon. Yes, they can, but not in their current state because they will permanently damage their leg, right? So use the cast, use the support right now to get to the place where you can run that marathon and you don't need anything else, right? So it's entirely okay for us to lean into what we need. And sometimes what we will need very clearly is the support of someone else. So even though I'm saying intuition is an inside job, you don't need to go to the psychic to get what the answer is. You might need someone to support you to release childhood trauma. You might need someone to help you cultivate a devotional practice. You might need someone to teach you how to breathe. You might need someone to, do whatever. So it's not that we are meant to do this alone. It's rather the recognition that the support we're seeking is to increase access to our own intuitive intelligence, which is premised on self-trust, self-esteem. So I think we should never beat ourselves up for what we are using, but we want to keep our eye on the prize, which is it is a stage. It is a temporary scaffold, like the cast on the broken leg. You don't want to keep that on forever because the leg will heal. It will remember its wholeness. It will come back to its perfection. And the cast would then become a really big problem. But we defend our trinkets and superstitions, as I call them, the casts, the props, like religion. So many of us left religion and came to spirituality and then replicate the dogma, right? You can only set intentions on a new moon. You can only cleanse your crystals if the planets are here. You can only do this if you're, that chakra is this color. We replicate this religious dogma. And I'm like, if it works for you and it's not causing harm to others, then go at it, use it. But don't believe that the prop, the scaffold, the tool is the source of the power, right? It is not. It is simply a stage that we need to remember. And that remembering is the work of our life. So it's okay if it takes a while. And it's okay if we forget and then remember again and then forget and remember again, right? Because I'm sure the path is not linear, especially on this awakening journey.
No kidding. Beautifully said. So many words of wisdom in here. Ricci-Jane, if there is something that you wanted to make sure this audience got, a clear message, one thing that you want to make sure that they walk away with, would that one thing be?
Ooh, no pressure. You know, my personal mission in this life is to teach people to know that they are God, that they are goddess. And so I can say that right now and say that's what I would want everyone that listens to know. But I would really like, I don't want to say it and make it feel so alien and strange, but rather like you are worth the work, the sweat, the effort to come home to that remembering. So whatever you need, be outrageously committed to the truth that you are divine perfection, and then do whatever is required with joy and passion and zealousness, because you are it, right? The way you treat yourself, the way that you value yourself is your gift to the world. And that is the measure of how we change everything, when we are willing to remember how precious we are.
Powerful. Mic drop. I love it. Thank you so much for your time, Dr. Ricci-Jane. I so appreciate you and the energy you bring forward. I will share your contact information in the show notes. I can see the beautiful work that you're doing, and I imagine there's people listening to this that will go, yes, I want to connect with Dr. Ricci-Jane. And we will also share the micro method meditation. You'll send that to me, and I'll put that in the show notes. That's fabulous. So wonderful. Thank you so much. And thank you, Joyful Journeyer, for tuning in today. If you enjoyed this episode, thumbs up. We'd love to hear from you as well. And please share it with anyone you think this may be helpful for. And we will catch you next time. Bye for now.